on the SaaSy Sales podcast, we meet Adam Pinkham, who's over at Binder, headquartered in Amsterdam. An interesting guy. He moved from IT management into solutions engineering, so we talk about what that's like. We talk about stakeholder management. How do you deal with that VP sales pressure, prima donna reps, and all the other pressures you get from the organization? We also talk about the transition from individual contributor to SE manager. How do you make the call? Let's get into it. So Adam Pinkham, great to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited because we don't hear enough from the pre-sales and solution engineering organization. You know, the often unsung heroes, the folks that have the role of not only connecting the technical solution to the business outcome, but things like we don't think about training new sales reps, right? That's not in your job description, but your people I know carry the burden of new account executives who are trying to figure out their job, and perhaps some of the best trainers in the organization are SEs. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I'm no stranger to that. A valuable point to touch upon as well, I think.
Yeah, great. Well, look, we'd like to hear a little bit more, I think, first about your role in the company you're at. So you're at Binder. Can you tell me what Binder does, who you sell to, a little bit about what the sale looks like, so we have some context for how you people work, and specifically your role at Binder?
Yeah, sure. So starting with our mission, we're really here to make your brand work for you. And if we think about the value prop, it's really about create, organize, and distribute marketing content at scale, right? So what that means in more tangible terms is Binder is basically the world's easiest to use platform for companies to grow and protect their brand, marketing, and product assets. So we provide tools to keep up with content demand, help them get to market faster, stay on brand, and distribute productively. If I think about the buyer groups, so we're really working with marketing, brand, creative, and digital teams, typically at the manager and executive level. A bit about us as a company, we've been around since 2013, coming up on 400 employees now, and we operate globally across 7 offices.
Wow, so that's pretty impressive growth. And how long have you been with Binder?
So I've been with Binder since 2016. Started at the beginning of that year, and yeah, it's been a wild ride. A lot of fast growth. I think we went from 10 to 50 million in just a few years. So lots of change.
I bet. Well, before we get into some of that, I'd love to talk a little bit about your personal journey, because you were in IT management before you switched over to the pre-sales, sales engineering side of things. Can you tell people, how did that experience help you? It feels like, you've been sitting on both sides of the table.
Yeah, great point. So having run an IT business for several years, I definitely procured a number of tools and technologies, and it really gave me a lot of empathy for the buyer. I really feel like that's come in handy in providing additional perspective to help coach the team through technical sales and strategies. Second point is really that it's helped me have a really good foundation for the technical knowledge, understanding things like infrastructure, hosting, and security. So from a customer perspective, I've always welcomed those challenging, complex technical questions.
It's interesting. It reminds me years ago when you talk about complex and technical. When I was at Salesforce back in 2005, I was fortunate enough to be paired with a sales engineer who had previously been on the core development team of Salesforce, literally building the product. And he tried to get me up to speed with all the terms I'd have to know. And then occasionally I'd go out on a limb and start using terms that I thought I'd figured out. And back then, one of those was Ajax. And at the time was a fairly trendy tech. And after a meeting one time, he said to me, "You know what, Matt, as far as you're personally concerned, you should just think that Ajax is a good cleaning product and leave the rest to me." It's dangerous when you know a little but not enough in sales. With respect to understanding the buyer journey, though, that's really interesting. Can you share with a lot of SEs, I'm sure, that are listening to this, and sales folks, if you think about the common threads in a sales motion that you learned as a technical buyer, what do you think are the things that sales organizations do particularly badly and set themselves up for failure when they're trying to sell to a technical buyer?
I think more than just a technical buyer, I'd start with the fact that you can't really sell until you've built rapport. So, in those cycles, I always bring it back to the time I went to buy a mattress, just to take things completely, off the rails here for a minute. But, I went into one store and the sales rep, sold me on all these amazing features of the mattress. Didn't really take any time to understand me and my needs. Whereas another rep in another store was showing me exactly the same product, right? Didn't speak about it at all, but just spent the entire time I was with him asking me about me, my sleeping habits, my challenges, right? And only at the end, for maybe 5 minutes of an hour conversation, did he speak a little bit about the product. And which one do you think I went with?
Yeah, makes total sense. It's fascinating, with these new call recording technologies like Chorus, for example, it's all of a sudden that's all getting exposed to us when we see how much talk time is on either side, and specifically whether they're talking about customer needs, wants and desires versus let me tell you the laundry list of product features we have available, right? Which, it's a problem.
Yeah, so going through a few of those processes, it definitely just gives you the perspective of what to look for in a good cycle. I think the qualification and discovery is worth its weight in gold, and the time you spend in that part of the process really cascades across the rest of the deal. So crucial, right? Like, you get to the demo stage in a technical sale, and if they haven't done effective discovery, they're probably going to spend loads of time showing you features based on their script, but not really what you're looking for.
I've been victim of so many where I know they're taking me through a click track. I'll ask them a question and they'll go, oh, yes, we'll get to that. They never do. And they just stay on the rails, and it's just the worst buyer experience, when they're just taking you through that, for sure. Now, let's focus in perhaps a little more on the role of sales. Do you call folks in your team solutions architects or sales engineers? What's
sales engineering? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we just don't hear enough about sales engineering, the role, the profession. I'd love to zoom in on that for a minute. So people often stay as individual contributors in the SE profession. They'll go on to being principal engineers and architects and so forth and get quite senior. And at some point they have to make a decision. Do I move off into management, or do I just become, an increasingly respected and effective individual contributor? Have you got some advice for SEs in terms of how they should think through that decision in their career?
Yeah, absolutely. A really interesting topic as well. For me, it's something that I really focus in on very early with new hires. I want to understand as early as possible what their aspirations are and which path they want to go down. I think it's incredibly important to do that so you can get the right development plan for them. In terms of the questions I'd ask, I think the critical thing is for an IC to self-reflect through a series of questions, right? To ask themselves things like, do they like being the one to deliver the impact on the deals, or do they prefer enabling others to do so? Do you like coaching, training, mentoring with your peers at that level? Are you interested by things like process and frameworks? Do you want to spend all of your time in more meetings? Do you like dealing with different personalities? Are you patient? I think these things are really important. And especially if you're staying within a company and thinking about going into management, you also need to think, like, how would you feel about managing your peers? And what about the tough conversations you may have to have? Those are really interesting things to think about. When I was at that step internally, because I made the step at Binder from IC into management, what I focused on was what gave me the most energy. I think that really helped. And I figured out that I really enjoyed working with people on the day-to-day, especially in empowerment, and ultimately helping other people come to a better outcome than I ever could. I think that was really important. And, coming from the IT world and having run a business, I've always been a very structured and process-driven person. So it gave me a good platform. And I really love putting a framework around everything to make it endlessly scalable. So when I hear something inspiring, I'm thinking about how can I make that a best practice or share and multiply that learning.
This is really interesting, and it gels very well with the common experience I see in the account executive world, where the next manager distinguishes themselves by being that go-to person that their peers look to for support and advice, and they're not a lone wolf. They're freely sharing their information. And to your point, when you point out to somebody that in management, actually it's about perhaps building, but certainly enforcing process and frameworks and looking at data. And by the way, in sales management, you're probably going to take a pay cut if you were a great IC. It's a terrifying prospect for the right people, though. It's really exciting. I also like one thing in particular that you said about helping people do the role better than you ever could. And, I remember from the black belt and sales engineering course, we have Stephen's mantra, which is, my job is to help my team do their job better than I ever could. And I just, we now use that in all our courses, because that's a realization a lot of managers don't have, in particular sales management, because they think they have to be the best salesperson. What's your experience been with new SE managers? Are they still getting their hands on the tools too much, or do they come across quite easily?
From the peer network in the black belt, do you mean?
No, just people in your team that you've seen, or others in your peer group have been ICs, moved to management. Is there a temptation to still be helping do demo prep and blah, 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 or in the SE world, is it more natural to transition into the pure management role, do you think?
Definitely speaking to my own experience, there's a heavy expectation on still being very visible in those in the enterprise deals, at least on the day-to-day, and having one visibility but influence to make sure we're driving the right outcomes. If I look at my peers, I think the transition isn't always easy from IC into management. When you're within a team, depending on the role, not in sales, but in other teams, right? The attention, the weight of expectation is not all on you as an individual. When you go into a leading role, suddenly you're fully accountable. You own that area, and everyone's looking at you for a delivery. And that, depending on the person, it can be something they really need to grow into. So I think that's also an important consideration.
One of the interesting things I say to managers is oftentimes you're invited into a meeting not because they think they need you so much as you are accountable for the outcome now, not them. It's like a safety blanket.
Yeah. And you said something interesting about, whether you still are involved in the deals when you go into management. I think that, it's important from time to time when you're running trainings and coaching that you still stay connected with the practice. So in my instance, on a quarterly basis, I try to stay active, and even the primary, if time permits, on a deal, just to, keep things tried and tested. But it is a challenging balance between, enabling the team, working on strategic initiatives, and getting into the weeds.
100%. So talking about challenges, perhaps more than any other function in the organization, you've got this really difficult managing up and across challenge, right? And that you have to train new A's as they onboard. You've got to coach your people to avoid deals that are going to go nowhere, pushing back sometimes on the VP of sales and saying, no, this is not a deal we're going to apply resource to. What advice do you have for SEs and SE managers in terms of navigating that challenge? What have you learned?
Yeah, really interesting challenge as well. I think that, SEs can add a lot of value in the onboarding process, as you touched upon earlier, but it's definitely not a substitute for a proper onboarding plan. So, start there, have a thorough onboarding plan, play to the competencies and skill sets that the AEs need. SEs can definitely add value on the competitive landscape, things like the product, right? But again, it isn't a substitute. It's more of an organic thing as they work with them to reinforce areas of the onboarding plan. I think that the AE-SE relationship is always a really interesting dynamic, and you always hear a lot talked about it. There can often be a lot of friction. So creating strong relationships is crucial. And that really starts with open, mindful, and constructive communication, feedback between the pair. As I've learned recently, clear rules of engagement really, in depth can really help too. For that shared vision and definition of how we operate in the sales cycle. On top of that, regular training is super important. It doesn't stop at the onboarding. And again, SEs are not there to just train on a regular basis. They also need their own training plan. But, we spoke about it a little bit when we talked about, my take on the sales cycle. I think that things like qualification, disqualification, and discovery don't always get the attention they deserve. We often pivot to demo best practices, but those two topics there need a lot of attention. And as we discussed, the effects cascade across the cycle. Win early to win late, I like to say.
I like that too. In the sales course, we have this image of a house that's built on sticks. And we say an opportunity is constructing a house, the foundation for which is discovery. And it doesn't matter what we do with the window dressing. If that foundation's not strong, it all comes apart in the end. I want to continue on this topic for a second. So in your experience, when people escalate a problem, the rep's dogmatic about chasing this deal, the SE has done a good qualification and said, this is not a fit for whatever reason. Oftentimes that gets pushed up. In your experience, how is that best dealt with? And what's the relationship need to look like between SE leadership and sales leadership to make sure that we don't sort of create a mess?
Yeah, I think that, first and foremost, I always want to give the AE and the SE the opportunity to resolve the difference or the discussion between them. It may look like if one of them escalates to their manager that, you have a conversation with them, you let things diffuse a little bit, you coach them around managing the conflict and let them speak first. If that doesn't work out, I think, you already kind of alluded to it, but sales and SE leadership need to have a well-aligned and tight relationship. There needs to be open communication there. I mean, within Binder, we all sit super close, sales and the SE team are just next to each other. Same with leadership. We speak on the day-to-day. There's no wall between us, so we can have these conversations easily. And I think that's really important.
No, that's great. So I have a question about leadership. Do you have a message for all the VPs or sales CROs out there in terms of ensuring that the pre-sales org is properly supported from an executive standpoint?
Yeah, I think, you also mentioned earlier about the different guises or aliases that sales engineering, solution architecture come under. I don't think it's always clear, the vision and definition of what sales engineering are there to do. So I think that first of all, that needs to be clear. Depending if it's pre-sales focused or also including expansion, it'll make a little bit of difference. But, just focusing on pre-sales, we're there to partner with sales, but the role is really, the goals are well aligned on a commercial level, but we're also there to drive product quality and customer success. And it's important to have that awareness. And my message is really that to ensure the SE team is of suitable size, grows in lockstep with sales capacity, right? And that, while the SEs will play a crucial role in helping train AEs, make sure that they get suitable training as well, right? I've seen within my experience that the SE team, because they're consultants, like internally and externally to an extent, it often gets overlooked that they can be trained. But, you know, an incremental increase to win rates goes a long way, right? So train your SEs, they're a highly valuable resource.
100%. Well, actually, nice segue. I wanted to ask you this because you participated in the SaaSy Black Belt SE Management course last year, and now it's about 6 months on. What has made a difference for you out of that experience?
Yeah, really enjoyed the Black Belt course. Found it really valuable. It definitely provided the instruction, best practice, and community to help accelerate my leadership career with a lot more certainty and insight. So I touched upon this, but before I did the course, I found it a real challenge to get clarity around sales engineering as an industry and craft, especially with all the aliases that I talked about, and I wasn't sure on the difference between them, right? But being able to go back to the organization and understand the drivers and ultimately align our organization under a shared definition and vision, it's been a great platform for success. You know, just touching upon the 3 areas I mentioned, you know, starting with instruction, I really liked how the course was led, you know, by a real world practitioner in Stephen. I think he was invaluable in providing insight into the foundations of success from, you know, world-class SaaS companies, so industry relevant, and both tested and proven in the field. You know, so, you know, a lot of credibility behind it, a lot of confidence in the practices. And you know, the workshop was a nice mix of both theory and practice. And then, you know, talking about best practices, there were a lot of takeaways that we could implement right away into the business. And it was particularly helpful given, you know, it's been a wild ride of growth at Binder. You don't always have as much time as you'd like to do your research and, you know, make sure the right, you know, processes are completely tuned. So that's been really helpful across things like, you know, coverage models, operational models, tooling. And lastly, the community aspect, right? So you've got peers from other leading SaaS companies. You've got an alumni network, you know, with coaching possibilities. It's really provided me a continued opportunity to refine and grow my personal and organizational practice. And it's also been really reassuring to know that other people are facing similar challenges and be able to solve them together.
That's fantastic. I love to hear that. Thank you for the feedback. I always have one question I love to ask folks in our alumni network, and really it's about how you think about things. Do you have some philosophical way of thinking about your professional journey or your role that you'd like to share with folks?
Yeah, I'll use a story here to make it clear. One I always remember, I was once told about a football match where one of the teams had very little of the ball, and I'm talking about soccer. Their goalkeeper, right, had made about 30 amazing saves in the match, causing a lot of frustration for the away team and fans. The game ending 0-0. And during the press conference, the goalkeeper was asked about whether he felt like he'd had a lot of luck today. And he came back and said, well, the more I prepare and train, the more luck I have every game. So really my message is preparation leads to success, and I'm feeling lucky.
So Adam, can you tell us a little bit about the sales motion? People are always interested to understand the complexity of the deal, how the SEs get engaged, and the SE to AE ratio. What can you share there?
Yeah, sure. So we've got in the EMEA sales organization 15 account executives with 5 SEs, so about a 3-to-1 ratio there. And this is covering the new business side. We're across all segments, so right from the SMB up to the strategic accounts. And we operate in a pooled model with affinity based on geography and language being in Europe. And then enterprise selling experience and vertical expertise comes into play for assignment. The deals themselves range from the straightforward at the SMB level to the complex at enterprise. Things like, use case, user community, a number of integrations have a big impact on the level of complexity. To give you an example, at the enterprise level, Binder will be positioned as like a full digital asset management system, feeding content to business critical systems like product information management, content management systems, and social media. And the buying teams can be numerous, like including add-ons like digital commerce and IT. So you can imagine when we're talking 10 integrations plus, it can get pretty complex. Deal size from 10K upwards to 300K ARR.
So follow-on question, it's particularly in the enterprise space, but across all of them, one of the questions people always ask is, how do you compensate a sales engineer? Is it, the balance between individual contribution versus team goals? Are you weighted more toward team goals or are ICs attached to revenue?
So we do a quite simple system where we just do a percentage of revenue split across the team. And it's worked really well for us to foster teamwork and make sure everyone is really willing and able to help across their peers, and that's balanced by a clear career framework with different levels within the team where they will obviously have a different salary accordingly.
I think it's great. I think it's the best practice. I often see the mistake of people being more individual contribution focused, which leads to people fighting over the best deals, refusing to work on certain deals, and certainly not helping their peers when perhaps they should be. So that makes total sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Fantastic. Hey, Adam, this has been great. I really enjoyed the time, and I know our community is going to get a lot of value out of this. If folks would like to connect with you because they're in the SE practice or know more about Binder, what's the easiest way to find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm also very open to being contacted by email at adam@binder.com.
Fantastic. Can't thank you enough. Hope you have a wonderful end to your day, and I'll look forward to sharing this with our community.
Cheers. Great to speak with you, Matt.